Far from home, no one will ever know our names, but the bard songs will remain. Tomorrow all will be known, and you're not alone, so don't be afraid in the dark and cold, but the bard songs will remain. They all will remain in my thoughts and in my dreams. They're always in my mind. These songs of hobbits, dwarves and men and elves, come close your eyes. Tomorrow will take us away, far from home. No one will ever know our names, but the bard songs will remain. They all will remain.
Hi everyone, it's me, the Chipmunk. You know, last time, after I did my last commentary on the pregnancy of Mary Jane in the Spider-Man comic book, I really started to think about not just him, but superheroes in general, and heroes of all kinds, whatever genre they come from, comic books, movies, TV, etc. You'll notice that almost all superheroes are never allowed to have children. They're never allowed to have wives. They occasionally get a girlfriend here or there, but it never leads to anything. And I wanted to kind of address my own little theories about that on the subject, and also get into some other things that I wasn't able to get into with the pregnancy of Mary Jane and all that. But let me start out by saying this. Superheroes are not allowed to have children. If you look at almost every comic book, with a few exceptions, and I'll point those out, they're never allowed to have families. And I think the reason for that is this. There's a belief from most fans and people in general that the hero can never have, like, say, a wife or a family, because that would give him other responsibilities, and therefore he would not be able to be a superhero. Now, I call bull on that, but I'll get to that in a minute. But that seems to be the biggest argument against allowing superheroes of any kind, let's say Superman or Batman, etc., having children. We as pregnancy lovers will never see, you know, a pregnancy written into, let's say, Batman, Superman, or any of those, because the heroes, for the most part, are deemed lone wolves. They're not allowed to have children because if they had children, then it would ruin the storyline. It would become bland and terrible. And the argument goes you would have to show the children growing up. So those seem to be the two biggest arguments. One, they can't have children because it would give them other responsibilities and it wouldn't be a good story anymore. And two, you would have to show the children growing up, if they had these children, and whomever they had them with, etc. Now, that's bull, and I'll give you a reason why. First off, what are the rules when it comes to superheroes and fantasy in general? Do you know? Well, let me tell you. There are no rules. There are none. It's fantasy. The rules are whatever you make them. Whatever the storyteller tells, those are the rules. The beauty of science fiction and fantasy and superheroes are that they can be whatever we want them to be. And the stories can be whatever we want them to be. Now, the idea that we can't have superheroes having children or families because it would ruin the storyline, and it would give them other responsibilities and therefore drag the story down, is preposterous. Take a character like Spider-Man, for instance. His entire theme is that with great power comes great responsibility. And they're always trying to give this character problems and things that make his life more complicated. If anything, having a pregnancy introduced into the storyline where the baby survives and the wife survives and they're all intact means that he would have a much more interesting storyline. You would have to see Peter Parker balance out his life as a superhero trying to save people while at the same time taking care of his wife and his child and trying to balance those two worlds out. It would make for an interesting storyline, I think. And I do not buy for a second that if they had allowed the child to live, that somehow that would have dragged Spider-Man down. And I can certainly say, knowing what we know now that's happened with Spider-Man, it would not have been the worst thing to happen to him at all. But of course, the main thing about the Spider-Man Mary Jane pregnancy storyline was the horrible, horrible way that it ended, and in such a violent and horrible manner. It was just truly depressing, disgusting. It was just awful. Number 2, before we get on to Spider-Man, I just want to address the other part real quick. The second part about, you would have to, if they had children, if the superheroes had kids, you would have to watch those kids grow up, and you would have to make the superheroes older. That's bull as well. These characters are like, some of them are like 60 or 70 years old, whatever. They're incredibly old. And they have never aged, hardly ever. And they have had, like for instance in Spider-Man you have Aunt May. Aunt May is like 300 million years old. She was old when the comics started back in the 1960s. I mean, come on, people. She's been old, and they kept her around. And it's like, well, she's old, so it's not like we have to show her getting older. She's always going to be old. Well, you know what? Logically speaking, she should be dead by now. And she was for a while, until they brought her back. Yeah, they actually did a storyline like that. But I don't want to get into that. The point I'm making is this. It's fiction. You don't have to show children getting old, just like you don't have to show the adults in the comic getting old. And here's a good example of why that's such bull. In the late 1990s, there was a 4 or 5 page storyline in the Fantastic Four. If you don't know who the Fantastic Four are, they're a group of superheroes, 4 of them, one with invisibility, one with stretching powers, one with like rock strong super strength, and the other guy is the Human Torch who has flaming powers and all that. They had 2 pregnancies in that storyline with Susan Storm. 2! One was their son, who was born in the 1960s. He is still around today, and they have never aged him. He is still a boy. That's as old as he's gotten, minus some other things that happened, but the point is, he has been in the comics for decades. It has not, I've never heard anyone say, oh, the Fantastic Four was completely ruined and destroyed when they brought Susan's son Storm in. That is preposterous. He's been there since the 1960s. It hasn't ruined it. Has it destroyed the comic? No, it's still being published. It's still going strong, so I guess introducing a child into the mix did not ruin anything. But here's something else that happened. In the late 1990s, there was this storyline that happened. What happened was, Susan Storm, the wife of Reed Richards, they had a baby in the 1960s in the original storyline. Some decades later, she got pregnant again. But Marvel, being kind of like the, bastards that they are, made her have a miscarriage. It was a sad storyline. Anyway, you go down a decade or less into the late 1990s or early 2000, I can't remember exactly. And guess what happens? They bring that very baby that had been miscarried back to life. Now, how could that happen? Well, it's science fiction. It's fiction. You can do whatever you want. There are no rules. In this world, there are gods and planet-devouring eating monsters. You can do whatever you want. There are no rules. What they do to bring this child back to life is that by this time, Susan Storm's son has become almost a powerful god. He's a god, basically. And in fact, in some parts of the storyline, I believe he was actually pictured as being older because he could will himself older. He could make him. He could do anything. He even created another world at one point. Well, I don't know all the storylines, but basically this is what happens. Before he gives up his godlike abilities and becomes just a mortal child again, he decides to right a terrible wrong. He wants to bring his unborn sister back, the child that Susan Storm miscarried a decade earlier in the storyline. So one of his last acts as a god is to bring back his dead sister by reincarnating her in his mother's womb. Now, it's not as disgusting as I'm making it sound, but, he's a god. He can do that. He puts the unborn child back to life right in his mother's womb, and then he becomes mortal again. And Susan Storm, in a 4 or 5 part series, you see her pregnant, and eventually she gives birth to their daughter. And funny thing about that is, this was featured actually in Del Kin's pregnancy comic reviews back when Del Kin had his old site. For those of you who have been around in the pregnant community a long time, you'll know who I'm talking about. Well, that's from that storyline where Susan Storm's child that she miscarried, some decades earlier, was brought back to life. She became pregnant. You got to see the pregnancy through about 4 or 5 issues, and then she gave birth. And so now in the comics, currently, they have a son and a daughter. So they have 2 children there. Two children there in that comic book. And it has not destroyed the Fantastic Four at all. Even though I don't keep up with the Fantastic Four a whole lot, it has obviously not destroyed the comic book because it's been around for decades. They had a son in the 1960s. He's still around. And now they have a daughter who was introduced sometime in the late 1990s. And she's still around. It has not destroyed the comic book. It has not destroyed the characters and all that. Now, some would argue probably, well, the Fantastic Four are more like a family and it works with them, but it wouldn't work with other people. That's bull crap. Bull crap. It doesn't matter that there are 4 people. It doesn't matter that Spider-Man's just one guy. That's bull. And it doesn't matter that Superman's one guy or that Batman's one guy, etc. The Fantastic Four are the perfect example of why you can have pregnancy in a comic book series, in a superhero series, and it doesn't have to ruin anything. They can have wives, they can have children. It doesn't destroy anything. And you don't have to show them growing older. You don't have to do any of that because why? It's fantasy. It's fantasy. It's fiction. There are no rules. So that is the greatest example of why all those 2 main arguments about, well, you would have to show them getting older, it would drag down the storyline, and number 2, it would, you would have to show the characters getting older. That's bullcrap. That's bullcrap. It's not just superheroes and comic books. You can go to any kind of genre, movies, television, etc. Whatever superheroes are, whatever heroes in general are, there will almost never be a pregnancy introduced into the storyline. And it's because people have this phobia about giving them wives or giving them children. They just think it would destroy the character, it would ruin everything. And that's utter bullcrap. We just recently had the Superman movie out, and I couldn't help but think about the last one, of course, Superman Returns. In Superman Returns, they actually did something that I thought they would never do. They never did it in the comics, but surprisingly they did it in the movie. In Superman Returns, they gave Superman a child. Now, of course, they cheated us from seeing the pregnancy or anything like that. That would have been interesting. In the movie, they just skip ahead, when he's like 5 or 6 years old. Something like that. And, I was one of the few people who thought that was actually the only interesting thing they did in that movie, was that they gave Superman a son.